Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have a really fascinating set of sources to explore today, and I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, this is gonna be great.
You know what makes this even more exciting is that you're someone who really lives and breathes this kind of complex information in your own work. So I think this deep dive is going to be particularly insightful.
I hope so. I mean, honestly, this stuff has been kind of on my mind a lot lately.
Hey,
Like how all these digital tools are changing the way we read and think. And for someone like me who, spends a lot of time with complicated information and research, it's like a question I keep coming back to.
absolutely. And, the core of what we're looking at today is this idea that technology and the way we use it isn't just, a neutral tool.
Right. It's not just like a hammer or something.
Exactly. It's more like shaping our minds in subtle ways, particularly when it comes to reading and thinking.
Yeah. And the main text we're going to be diving into is The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. It's like a classic on this topic.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to kind of extract the key takeaways from all this material, particularly for someone like you who's deeply immersed in their field.
Yeah, like what are the implications for someone who really needs to think deeply and engage with complex ideas for their work?
Exactly. So shall we jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first thing that struck me in the materials was this idea from Marshall McLuhan,
Hmm.
the medium is the message, kind of a famous phrase.
Oh, yeah, everyone's heard that one.
Right, but what's interesting is that McLuhan wasn't just celebrating new technologies. He was also warning about their potential dangers.
Yeah, he saw the rise of what he called electric technology as kind of a double-edged sword.
Right, and this is way back in the 60s when radio and television were the big new things.
Yeah, but his point was that this shift from print to these new electronic media could have some unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, he was worried that it would lead to a kind of numbing of our senses and even our minds. Like, we wouldn't be able to engage with complex ideas in the same way anymore.
So it's like he was already seeing the potential for the internet and all its distractions even back then.
Pretty much. And for someone like you who's so focused on deep thinking in your field, that's a pretty relevant concern.
It is. And then the source material introduces us to these personal accounts of how people's reading habits have changed,
Mm.
and they're so relatable.
Yeah, like these are real people grappling with this stuff.
Exactly. So there's this guy, Scott Karp, who used to work for magazines and then got into blogging, and now he finds himself not reading books at all anymore.
I know that feeling.
Right. And he even questions whether the way he thinks has changed because of all the online reading he does.
That's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is.
Yeah.
And then there's Bruce Friedman, a pathologist who describes his thinking as having this staccato quality now.
I think I get what he means.
Like he can only focus on these short bursts of information, and he can't even imagine reading something like War and Peace anymore.
Yeah, like his brain has been rewired for the internet.
Right? And for you as an expert in your field where you have to deal with so much complex information, that's got to raise some flags, right?
Absolutely. I mean, deep thinking takes time and concentration. And if our brains are getting used to these short bursts of information, it's like we're losing the ability to really dive deep.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's
No.
also this guy Davis, a blogger, who actually feels like the internet has made him smarter.
Yeah, he's like the internet optimist.
Right. He says it's given him access to so many more connections and ideas. And even though he reads less in the traditional sense, he feels like his thinking has become more expansive.
It's interesting how he sees it as a trade-off.
Yeah, like he's willing to give up some depth of reading for the breadth of knowledge he's getting from the internet.
It makes you wonder what smarter even means in this context.
Totally. And then the discussion takes us back to the early days of computing at Dartmouth College.
Hmm.
And it paints this fascinating contrast.
Oh, yeah, between the old way of doing things and the new.
Exactly. So you have these early computer terminals where students are accessing information in this new way. And then you have the library with its stacks of books and this feeling of calmness.
I love that feeling of being surrounded by books.
Me too. It's like even though both environments are full of information,
Yeah.
the way you engage with it is completely different.
Right. It's like the library invites you to slow down and really think,
And the computer terminal is like, come on, let's go, let's get this information fast.
which is kind of how the internet feels today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of early computers, the text then talks about the host's own experience with the Macintosh Plus and HyperCard and the early online services like AOL.
Oh, yeah, the good old days.
Right. And there was this sense of wonder and possibility, like this technology was going to change everything.
And it did in a lot of ways.
But looking back from where we are now, do you think there were any potential downsides that maybe people weren't paying attention to?
Well, I think the focus was so much on the newness and the potential that maybe people didn't fully grasp how these tools might change the way we think in the long run.
It's like we were so excited about the possibilities that
Yeah.
we didn't really stop to consider the potential trade-offs.
Exactly. And then we get to this amazing story about Nietzsche and the Mulling-Hansen writing ball.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
So Nietzsche, this famous philosopher, right? He gets this new writing ball, which is like an early typewriter.
Then I've seen pictures of it. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's like this big round thing with all these keys, and he starts using it, and he realizes something profound.
What's that?
He realizes that the tool you use to write actually influences the way you think.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah, he said something like, our writing equipment takes part in the forming of our thoughts.
And that's so relevant to what we're talking about today, right?
Totally, because it suggests that these digital tools we're using aren't just neutral. They're actually shaping our minds in ways we might not even realize.
Exactly. And to really understand how that happens, the text delves into this concept of neuroplasticity.
Oh, yeah. The brain's amazing ability to change.
Right. So it explains that our brains aren't fixed. They're constantly adapting and rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
It's like this incredible ongoing process.
And it mentions Freud's early ideas and Hebb's rule, which is cells that fire together wire together.
So basically, the more you use certain neural pathways, the stronger they become.
And that means that our digital habits are literally changing our brains.
Yeah, because if we're constantly skimming and scanning and jumping between different things online, our brains are getting really good at that, but maybe not so good at other things.
Like deep thinking and sustained attention.
Exactly. And then the text uses this analogy with map making, which I thought was really interesting.
I like that one too.
So it explains how maps aren't just neutral representations of space, they actually embody a certain way of thinking.
Like they emphasize measurement and abstraction.
Right, and the point is that the tools we use to understand the world actually shape our understanding.
So just like a map influences the way we think about space, these digital tools are influencing the way we think about information.
Exactly. And then there's this other analogy with the mechanical clock.
Oh yeah, how that changed our perception of time.
Right, so before the mechanical clock, time was more fluid and cyclical, but the clock broke time down into these uniform, measurable units.
And that had a huge impact on the way people thought.
Yeah, it made them more focused on measurement and efficiency, and it led to this more linear view of time.
And the text argues that these intellectual technologies like maps and clocks, they embody a certain intellectual ethic.
I like that phrase.
Me too. And it's this ethic that shapes the way we think and approach the world.
So the traditional ethic of deep reading, for example, is all about sustained attention and critical thinking.
Right, and the question is, how is that ethic being challenged or even transformed by these new digital tools?
That's the big question. And then the discussion moves into the neurological effects of literacy itself.
Right, like how reading actually changes the brain.
So studies have shown that there are differences in brain structure and function between literate and illiterate people.
And even between people who read different writing systems.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
amazing how the brain adapts to the specific demands of reading.
And the text traces the evolution of writing surfaces from these early ephemeral materials
Yeah.
to the codex, which is basically the book as we know it.
And it highlights how word spacing, which seems like such a small thing, was actually a huge innovation.
Because it made reading faster and easier.
And it allowed for this deeper, more immersive kind of reading.
And the text describes this as the development of the literary brain.
Yeah, like a brain that's wired for deep engagement with complex texts.
And then, of course, we get to the printing revolution.
Gutenberg's big moment.
Exactly. So the text explains how the printing press initially had a slow adoption rate.
People were resistant to change even back then.
Right. But eventually it had this massive impact on society.
Yeah, it led to the rise of literacy and spread of knowledge and ideas.
But it also created some anxieties,
Like, people were worried about the spread of misinformation and dangerous ideas.
which is kind of similar to what we're seeing with the internet today.
Right. It's like every new technology brings both opportunities and challenges.
And to illustrate the power of deep reading, the text brings in this poem by Wallace Stevens.
I love how they use literature to make these points.
Me too. And this poem is like a perfect example of a text that demands deep engagement.
Like, you can't just skim it. You have to really slow down and think about every word.
Exactly. And then we move into the rise of electronic media, starting with Lead Forest's Adion.
which was basically the first electronic amplifier.
Right. And then Alan Turing's theoretical work on the universal machine, which laid the groundwork for the modern computer.
These were like the foundational technologies that made the digital age possible,
And they led to this massive increase in information processing power.
which has had a huge impact on every field.
Absolutely. And then the internet comes along, and suddenly we have this convergence of all these different media,
Text, images, audio, video, all in one place.
and people are spending more and more time online.
And less time reading print publications.
So we're swimming in information, but are we really engaging with it deeply?
That's the question. And the internet is also changing the way businesses operate and the way information flows.
Yeah, like CDs and GVDs are practically obsolete, and print newspapers are struggling.
Because digital distribution is so much cheaper and faster.
And this is having a big impact on the way knowledge is shared and preserved.
Right, like what happens to scholarship in this new digital landscape?
That's a big question. And then the text acknowledges the benefits of the internet.
Like the interactivity and the hyperlinking and the searchability.
Right, but it also points out that these features can have some downsides.
Like they can lead to more fragmented attention and less deep thinking.
And then we get to the Amazon Kindle, which is kind of like a symbol of the future of reading.
Yeah. Will ebooks completely replace printed books?
That's the big question. And the text raises this interesting point about how ebooks might be losing some of the qualities that make physical books unique.
Like the linearity and the sense of physical boundaries.
Right, and it makes you wonder if those qualities are important for deep reading and understanding.
Yeah, maybe there's something about the physicality of the book that helps us engage with the material in a different way.
And then the text explores the idea of the web as a form of social media.
So it's not just about consuming information, it's about creating and sharing it too.
And this is leading to new forms of writing and communication.
Like blogging and social media posts and online forums.
And the text suggests that this might be shifting us away from more traditional forms of writing.
Like the kind of writing that requires sustained attention and deep thought.
So the question is, what does this mean for the future of scholarship and intellectual discourse?
Yeah, like can we still have those deep conversations in this new online environment?
And then we get to this idea that deep reading might be becoming less common,
Like it's going to be a skill that only a few people have.
which is kind of a scary thought.
Yeah, because deep reading is so important for understanding complex ideas and developing critical thinking skills.
And then the discussion turns to multitasking.
Oh, the bane of modern existence.
Right. And it mentions this anecdote from a Xerox pay-ars meeting where people were already debating the merits of multitasking versus focused concentration.
And this was back in the 70s,
So this isn't a new problem.
but it's definitely gotten worse with the internet.
Because we're constantly bombarded with notifications and updates and messages.
It's like our brains are being trained for distraction.
And the text points out that multitasking actually comes at a cost.
Yeah, it might feel like we're getting more done, but we're actually sacrificing efficiency and accuracy.
And we're also hindering our ability to think deeply and creatively.
Because deep thinking requires sustained attention and focus.
And then we get to the neurological evidence about the impact of internet use.
This is where it gets really interesting.
So this study by Gary Small showed that even just 5 hours of online searching can lead to measurable changes in the brain.
Like the brain is literally rewiring itself in response to internet use.
And this raises some questions about the long-term effects of all this digital stimulation.
Yeah, like are we becoming more adept at processing information or are we sacrificing other cognitive skills?
That's the big unknown. And then the text explains the limitations of working memory.
That's our short-term memory, the one we use to hold information in mind while we're working on it.
And it's a limited resource.
Yeah, we can only hold so much information in our working memory at any given time,
And the internet is constantly overloading our working memory with information.
which makes it harder to process information deeply and transfer it to long-term memory.
So it's like we're constantly taking in information, but we're not really retaining it.
Exactly. And then the text discusses research on the cognitive load of hypertext.
So hypertext is basically the system of links that connects all the information on the internet.
And it's a really powerful tool, but it also comes with a cognitive cost.
Because it takes mental effort to evaluate all those links and decide which ones to follow.
And all that decision-making can actually interfere with our comprehension and retention of the information.
So it's like hypertext gives us access to more information, but it also makes it harder to process that information deeply.
It's a trade-off.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the issue of multimedia and how it divides our attention.
Right, so we're constantly being bombarded with images and videos and sounds,
And that can be really stimulating, but it also makes it harder to focus on any one thing.
and this can interfere with learning and understanding.
Because deep comprehension requires sustained attention on a single stream of information.
And then the text brings up Jacob Nielsen's eye tracking studies.
Oh yeah, the ones that show how people read online.
Right, and what they found is that people don't read online text the same way they read print text.
Yeah, they tend to skim and scan and jump around a lot,
And they often read in this characteristic F pattern.
where they focus on the top and left side of the page.
And this suggests that people aren't really engaging with online text in a deep way.
They're more likely to be looking for specific information or just getting a general overview.
And then there's this study from University College London that found that online researchers engage in this behavior called power browsing
Which is basically rapidly skimming through lots of different sources.
and rarely reading anything in depth.
Which is kind of understandable given the pressure to stay up to date on the latest research.
But it also raises questions about the quality of understanding that's being achieved.
Yeah, like, are we just scratching the surface of all this information?
And then there's Zimi Liu's research, which found that there's been a general shift towards browsing scanning and nonlinear reading habits online.
And a corresponding decline in time spent on deep reading.
So it's like our brains are getting used to this constant flow of information, and we're losing our ability to focus and engage deeply.
Which is a pretty scary thought considering how much our society relies on deep thinking and problem solving.
And then the text discusses the impact of multitasking on deep thinking.
Oh yeah, back to multitasking.
And it quotes Jordan Grafman, who says that multitasking might improve nimbleness, but it hinders deep and creative thinking.
Because creativity requires time and space to let ideas incubate and develop.
And David Meyer points out that even with practice, multitasking is rarely as effective as focused attention.
So it's like we're trading quality for quantity.
And this is a big problem for experts in any field.
Because expertise requires deep thinking and sustained attention.
And then there's Patricia Greenfield's review of media effects on intelligence.
This is a really comprehensive analysis.
Yeah, she looked at tons of research, and she concluded that every medium develops some cognitive skills at the expense of others.
So it's like a trade-off.
Exactly. And she suggests that the internet might be enhancing our visual spatial skills,
Which is good for things like video games and navigating online environments.
but it might be weakening our deep processing, critical thinking, and imagination skills.
Which are crucial for things like reading, writing, and problem solving.
So it's like we're gaining some skills, but we're also losing some.
And the question is, are we losing the more important ones?
And then there's this Stanford study that looked at heavy media multitaskers.
The people who are always juggling multiple devices and streams of information.
And what they found is that these people are more easily distracted and have less control over their working memory.
So it's like their brains are constantly overloaded and they can't focus on any one thing.
And this has implications for experts because expertise requires focus and attention.
Exactly. And then the text discusses the Flynn effect, which is the observed rise in IQ scores over generations.
So people are getting smarter, right?
Well, not necessarily. The text points out that this might not be a simple increase in general intelligence.
It might be more about how we define intelligence.
Yeah, like maybe we're getting better at certain kinds of thinking, but not others.
And James Flynn, who's the guy who discovered this effect, he suggests that the gains might reflect a shift towards more abstract and scientific reasoning.
Which makes sense given the increasing complexity of our world.
But the question is, are we losing other important cognitive skills in the process?
Like the ability to think deeply and critically about complex issues.
And then we get to Google and its mission to organize the world's information.
Which is a pretty ambitious goal.
It is, and they've done an amazing job.
Yeah. Google's an incredible tool.
But the text points out that their philosophy prioritizes speed and efficiency of access.
Like information is just a commodity to be retrieved as quickly as possible.
And that raises some questions about how we value information.
Yeah, like is speed the most important thing, or is it more important to engage with information deeply and critically?
And then the text tells this story about Nathaniel Hawthorne.
The author of The Scarlet Letter.
Right. And he's in Sleepy Hollow trying to have this contemplative moment.
Yeah, soaking up the atmosphere.
And suddenly he's interrupted by the sound of a train.
Which is a symbol of the Industrial Revolution and the way it disrupted the peace and quiet of nature.
And the text uses this story to illustrate the tension between contemplative thinking and the distractions of the modern world.
It's like we're constantly being bombarded with information and stimulation.
And it's harder than ever to find time for quiet reflection.
Which is so important for creativity and deep thinking.
And then we get to Vannevar Bush and his idea for the Memex.
Which was like a precursor to the personal computer.
Yeah, he envisioned this machine that could store and retrieve all your notes and ideas and connect them in meaningful ways.
Well, it's a brilliant idea.
But the text points out that even though we have these amazing tools now,
Like computers and the internet,
we're still struggling with information overload.
which suggests that the problem isn't just technological, it's also cognitive.
Like we need to develop better strategies for managing all this information.
Exactly. And then the text discusses Google's early aspirations for artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, the idea that we'll eventually create machines that are smarter than humans.
And that these machines will be able to solve all our problems.
But the text challenges this idea.
Yeah, like it points out that human intelligence is really complex and multifaceted.
And it's not just about processing information, it's about things like creativity, intuition, and empathy.
Which are things that machines are still pretty bad at.
And then there's this discussion of memory and how we're increasingly outsourcing our memory to the internet.
So instead of remembering things ourselves, we just Google them.
And the text argues that this is actually changing the way we think.
Because when we rely on external memory, we're not engaging our own internal memory processes.
Which are crucial for deep learning and understanding.
So it's like we're trading off our own cognitive abilities for the convenience of the internet.
And this leads to the idea that the web is actually a technology of forgetfulness.
Wow, that's a powerful phrase.
Right, because it's making us less reliant on our own memories.
And more reliant on external sources of information.
And the text contrasts this with the calculator, which is a tool that actually aids understanding.
Because it frees up our working memory to focus on higher level thinking.
So the calculator is a good example of a technology that enhances our cognitive abilities.
While the internet might be doing the opposite.
And then the text emphasizes the importance of sustained attention.
Which is the ability to focus on a single task for an extended period of time.
And it argues that the more we use the internet, the more our brains become wired for distraction.
So it's like we're training our brains to be less focused.
And this has implications for everything we do.
From our work to our relationships to our own sense of well-being.
And then the text describes the host's personal experiment of limiting their internet access.
Oh, yeah. How did that go?
Well, they found that it was really difficult at first.
Because they were so used to being constantly connected.
But eventually they started to experience these benefits.
Like more focus and deeper thinking.
And a greater sense of calm and peace.
So it's like the internet was actually stressing them out.
And then the text raises these broader questions about the impact of technology on society and culture.
Yeah, like how are these changes in our reading, writing, and thinking habits affecting the way we interact with each other and the world?
And it suggests that we need to be more mindful of the way we're using technology.
And make sure that it's serving us and not the other way around.
And then the text brings up this fascinating program called ELIZA.
Oh, yeah, the one that pretends to be a therapist.
Right, and it was created by Joseph Weizenbaum back in the 60s.
And it was surprisingly effective at getting people to open up to it.
Even though it was just a computer program.
And the text uses this to illustrate how easily we can be fooled by technology.
And how we tend to anthropomorphize machines.
Like we project our own thoughts and feelings onto them.
And this is something to be aware of as we interact with increasingly sophisticated AI systems.
Because we need to remember that they're not human.
And then the text discusses McLuhan's idea that our tools numb the very parts of our body they amplify.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, so for example, the map numbs our innate navigational abilities.
Because we become so reliant on the map that we stop paying attention to our surroundings.
And the text suggests that the same thing might be happening with the internet.
Like we're becoming so reliant on it for information that we're losing our ability to think for ourselves.
And then the text talks about this trend towards user-friendly software.
Which is designed to make things easier for us.
But the text argues that this might actually be diminishing our own brain power.
Because we're not having to work as hard to figure things out.
And it uses this study by James Evans to illustrate this point.
Oh yeah, the one about academic articles.
Right, so Evans found that the increased availability of online academic articles has actually led to scholars citing fewer and more recent articles.
Because it's so easy to just search for articles online.
And they're not having to go to the library and dig through stacks of journals.
Which is less convenient, but it might actually lead to a broader and deeper understanding of the field.
And then the text talks about how online platforms use algorithms to guide our actions and choices.
Oh yeah, those things that are always recommending stuff to us.
And the text argues that these algorithms are actually scripts for our behavior.
So it's like we're not really making our own decisions,
We're just following the paths laid out for us by these algorithms.
which is kind of creepy when you think about it.
It is. And then the text mentions research suggesting that spending time in nature can improve attention, memory, and cognition.
I definitely believe that.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's like nature is a antidote to the digital overload.
Yeah, it gives our brains a chance to rest and recharge,
And then the text talks about empathy.
which is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others.
And it quotes Antonio Damasio, who says that empathy requires slower neural processes.
So it's like empathy is the opposite of the fast-paced digital world.
Exactly. And the text suggests that we need to be careful not to lose our capacity for empathy in this digital age.
Because empathy is what makes us human.
And then the text concludes with this idea that we need to be mindful of what we're becoming in this digital age.
Yeah, like are we adapting in ways that are beneficial or are we losing something important?
And it quotes Heidegger, who is worried about calculative thinking overshadowing meditative thinking,
So it's like we're becoming more focused on efficiency and productivity.
and less focused on things like reflection, contemplation, and empathy.
And the text leaves us with this challenge to really think about how we're using technology and what it's doing to us.
And to make sure that we're using it in a way that enhances our lives and doesn't diminish them.
That's a great way to end this deep dive. I feel like I have a lot to think about now.
Me too. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And to our listeners out there who are experts in their own fields, I'd love for you to consider how these shifts in attention, memory, and reading habits might be subtly influencing your own work.
Yeah, like what are the unique challenges and opportunities that this digital age presents for your particular area of expertise?
That's a great question to ponder. And I encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and maybe even experiment with some of the strategies we've discussed for maintaining focus and deep thinking in this increasingly digital world.
It's definitely a journey we're all on together.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time.